Good afternoon and welcome to ANCP's Annual Development Plan webinar. I'll just briefly go through some webinar housekeeping and then hand over to Maidi Horden, Assistant Director in the DFAT NGO Program Performance and Quality section. The webinar will take around 1 hour 15. The DFAT team will be answering questions throughout the webinar, so please type any questions into the chat box. If you can't hear us anymore or have any technical issues, please let us know through the chat. The webinar will also be recorded and posted on ACRID's YouTube channel in a few days. Please also stay online at the end of the webinar to complete a very short survey. Before we start, could anyone please type into the chat box that they can hear me all right? Great, thank you. I'll now hand over to Maidi.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Ina, and thanks again to ACRID for hosting this series of ANCP-related webinars every year to help keep you guys up to date on the program and processes. We really appreciate your support with the webinars. So let me start by introducing the ANCP team members that I have here with me today. First, I've got Glenn Williams from our Smarty Grants support unit, and Glenn's here, so if you've got any questions about Smarty Grants and how to use it while completing your ad plans throughout the session, then please feel free to flick those questions through as well. And also with me is Rosemary Welsh, who's part of the ANCP operations team and key in making sure that the whole ad plan process works smoothly. What I'm going to do today is start off with a very short few PowerPoint presentation slides. Just going to go through some of the key dates and process steps with ad plans. And then I'll just quickly give a reminder about grant amounts and the ANCP funding policy and how that's going to work for this year. Finally, at the end of the slides, I'll just give you a reminder of key contact details for the ANCP team and relevant links, web links. Then after that, I'm going to jump into a live screen capture of the ad plan forms on Smarty Grants. I've got a little mock ANCP submission there that you can have a look at as we go through. And I'm going to focus today on the header level form and also the project level form. I'm going to highlight for you key differences between the form from last year and this year. But I'm also going to make sure that for those of you who are completing ad plans for the first time this year, that I hopefully give you enough of a reminder about the type of information we're looking for in each field in the ad plan so you can submit the best ad plan possible this year or for 2018-19. So as Ina said, please feel free to ask your questions throughout, and Rosie and Glenn are here to help answer those questions. So we'll read your question back and answer it for the whole group as we go along. So let's start off by just giving a little update as to where we are up to in the ANCP program cycle for the year. As I'm sure you're all aware, next week on Tuesday, the government will hand down the federal budget for the 2018-19 financial year, and that's when we will find out what the ANCP annual appropriation will be in the budget. In the days following the hand down of the budget, we will use the ANCP funding policy to calculate the grant amounts for each of the full level NGOs. And we hope in the week beginning Monday, the 14th of May, that in some point in that week that we'll be able to call each of the full NGOs and confirm your exact ANCP grant amount for 2018-19. Shortly thereafter, once we've plugged all of the details into your 57 different annual grant agreements, we will distribute those annual grant agreements to all of your organisations, asking for them to be returned in June. Ad plans are then due, as you hopefully know by now, at 5 p.m. on the 30th of June. So the 30th of June is the ad plan submission date every year. This year it happens to fall on a Saturday. And a reminder that with ad plans being due on a Saturday, that although the window is open through till 5 p.m. on the 30th of June, any ICT support either from Glenn and his team at DFAT or in fact the Smarty Grants provider will only be available up to the close of business on Friday the 29th of June. So no IT support available after then. Performance reports, again, they're due every year on the 30th of September at 5 p.m. and this year the 30th of September falls on a Sunday. So again, ICT support will only be available up until close of business on Friday the 28th of September. I think we're also aware that there's some public holidays in Victoria, I think, on Friday the 28th of September, and also I think there's a public holiday in the ACT and New South Wales on the 1st of October. So make sure you factor all of those things in when planning your submission process internally in your organisation. So next, just a reminder of funding and the implementation of the funding policy, which we're now halfway through. I know for many of you in planning your ad plan, the actual grant amount that your organisation will receive is kind of a key factor, obviously, in determining what your grant amounts will be, in what your ad plan will be. So a reminder that there is 4 main variables for full level NGOs that are going to impact your grant amount in 2018-19. The first variable is whatever the annual ANCP budget appropriation is going to be. And we will know that next week on Tuesday night. The next variable is your organisation's RDE this year. And then the third variable is all of the other 56 NGOs RDE as well. So although your organisation's RDE may have gone up or down, it's going to be proportionate compared to everyone else's RDE, and collectively that the total group's increase or decrease in RDE and the proportionate movement of your RDE compared to those other organisations. The final variable that can impact full level NGO funding is new NGOs entering the program or NGOs upgrading from base to full. And in 2018-19, there's no new NGOs entering or no upgrades, so that won't be an influencing factor on the full level grant amounts this year. Our advice at the moment, and it's only a week to go, but our advice is to prepare for some different scenarios and have a few ideas about how you would amend your ad plan depending on an increase or a decrease or around about the same amount of funding being received. With the introduction of the ANCP funding policy in April 2016, you'll recall that at that time we committed to a 4-year phased approach to implementing the funding policy so that it wasn't a big jump either in increasing or decreasing funds for NGOs. So last year in 2017-18, you'll recall that we had committed to a maximum 10% decrease for anyone's grant amount and a maximum 15% increase. This year, we're committing to a maximum 15% decrease for any one NGO's grant amount and a maximum 20% increase. And those increases and decreases are compared to the previous year's funding, so not overall, it's not compounding. If we will be able to tell you in the coming fortnight or so what your grant amount is, but at this point, if you should hopefully know whether or not your organisation is on the path to increase or a decrease in funds, or whether you're around about where you need to be, and be able to plan accordingly for that. I wanted to just step through now quickly to remind you of the process that DFAT goes through in assessing your ad plans after you submit them. So in the first instance, as you know, you're submitting your ad plans to us on the 30th of June. And hopefully in the lead up to the 30th of June, if you're planning any projects in do not travel locations or very sensitive locations, we strongly recommend that you get in touch with the ANCP team now, if you haven't done so already, to flag that you are planning new projects in those high-risk locations. After you submit your plan to us on the 30th of June, the ANCP team will do a quick initial assessment. We'll make sure that you've completed all the forms, that you've uploaded the correct attachments, that you have actually submitted all the forms. We'll then run some reports and divide out the new ANCP projects or the projects in high-risk locations or the projects that you indicate to us have been significantly amended from last financial year. The ANCP team will distribute those to our colleagues internally, both at High Commissions and embassies and relevant thematic teams internally, and ask them for their feedback on those projects. So it's around about the 3rd or 4th of July before we've been able to do those initial checks, consolidate all of those reports and get them out to our post desks and thematic teams. We always provide our internal colleagues with 2 weeks to review those project level reports and give us any feedback back to the ANCP team. In that intervening 2-week period, the ANCP team is also reviewing and assessing all of your new high risk and significantly amended projects, plus, maybe some others that we're interested in. And then in around about that last week of July, we'll take the ANCP team's feedback plus any of our other internal colleagues' feedback and consolidate that into one report to come back to every NGO no later than the 30th of July. We often get NGOs asking us in around about the middle of July how we're going with our assessments and if we're ready to receive your invoices and things. Because of this time frame that we're working to, it's going to be unlikely that we're coming back to you much earlier than those final few days of July. We are working to the time frame to respond to everyone by the 30th of July, but it's going to be in those last few days. Once we've come back to you on the 30th of July, we'll either fully approve your ad plan at that stage, or we might ask for amendments and changes to a number of ad plans, or we might ask you for significant amendments and changes to some of your projects. The ANCP team will liaise between yourselves and our other internal colleagues that have had queries to get your project over the line for approval. That's sort of our goal. Once we've finished all of that liaison internally, we'll come back to you and confirm that your ad plan is fully approved and that we're ready for you to invoice us for your first tranche payment, which is that 80% payment. So I'll come back to this slide at the end so that you all have the correct contact details, which I'm sure you do already. But a reminder that if you've got any questions as you go through and you're completing your ad plans, please do feel free to give us a call or send us an email. And a reminder too that when you are submitting your ad plans, the URL that's shown at the bottom of the page here, that's smartygrants.com.au/ANCP 2018-19, you do need to use that specific URL and pop that into your browser in order to access the 2018-19 round. So that's where we're going to go now. And please do let me know as I switch over to the Smarty Grants screen if you can't see the screen that I've switched over to now. So now hopefully you should be able to see the login page that if you followed that specific 2018-19 URL, this should be where you land. So the first step you're going to do is using the very big blue text right at the top of the page where it says login. You're going to click on that and it's going to take you through to the login page for your organisation. You should hopefully know what your login is. I'm going to use our generic login. So I'm not typing, hang on, here we go. There we go. So logging in your usual way, and I am following, you're hopefully following along with me, and the system is hopefully going to log us in. Okay, so when you've successfully logged in, you should hopefully come to this page. At the top of the page, you'll see 2 options, either My Submissions or Log Out. When you click on My Submissions, it should take you through to a page, and the system's going to be slow for me naturally because we're presenting it to you live. The system should give you a page where it's got all of your header form and your program level forms and your project level forms from last year that Glenn and his team have already migrated over into the 2018-19 round. They should all be sitting there waiting for you. So at the top of the page, you should see it like this, and you will have historically submitted ad plans underneath, but right at the top of the page, you should see this 2018-19 round, And just to unpack that box, when you click on Show, it should unpack. Here now you should see your header at the top, 2018-19 header at the top. Then you should have programs underneath, and each of your programs, you may have one or more projects. So you can see in this example, I've got one header, I've got two programs, the first being Protection of Women and Children, and my second program being Agriculture. And then under each program, I've got some projects. So I've got a Vietnamese project and an Indonesia project under my first program. And at the moment, I don't have any projects underneath my second agriculture program. So today I'm going to start off by showing you the header, and let's talk about the questions that we ask here and the type of information that we're going for. So a reminder, and we just spoke about the ad plan process and approving that and the way we share that information internally with our colleagues at DFAT. A reminder that the header is really very much information that's just going to the ANCP team, and it's really only our team that read that header information at the moment. And the project level forms really do need to be standalone to be able to fully tell the story of each of your projects as a standalone document if you like. As we'll go through, you see we've made some significant changes to the header form this year. We've really simplified it quite a bit. Every single organisation must complete a header level form. The front page just breaks it down, the header, program and project level form structure for you. So there's some guidance text there. And please do remember to read the guidance text. We update it every year to try and be a little more precise about the type of information that we're looking for. The first page of the header is very much nuts and bolts, and hopefully it should be all migrated there for you, and you shouldn't have to update too much unless you've changed some of your organisation's details. So this is all the name and addresses and ABN numbers of your organisation. A reminder here at this point that given we will be sending you your ANCP grant agreement in May of this year, later this month, we won't be using your 2018-19 information to populate that grant agreement. So you must make sure that your 2017-18 header level form is up to date with your organisation's name and ABN and address details, because that is the information that we will be using to populate your new grant agreement for the coming year. So please make sure that's up to date. Let the ANCP team know if you need us to reopen your header so that you can update those details ahead of receiving your grant agreement later this month. A reminder that as you go through each page on the ad plan form, that you need to either save progress or hit save and close or use the next page button in order to save your progress as you move through. If you walk away from your computer for anything longer than 30 minutes without saving the work that you've updated, Smarty Grants will revert you back to the login screen, and there's a risk that you may lose work that you were halfway through. So do use the save progress or save and close or next page button before you walk away from your computer screen. The next page goes through and is the spot where you provide your contact details in your header form. It's all pretty straightforward, but one thing that we really want to ask you is that during the course of the year, as staff come and go from your organisation, unfortunately the ANCP team can't modify your ad plan. So we can reopen the header level form for you to be able to update the contact details, but you don't want us being able to change your ad plan. So that's why it's the only people that are able to change these contact details is your organisation. And there's a whole range of areas within the department that rely on the contact information that you've got here at the header level, not just the ANCP team. So if the secretary of the department is looking to meet with your CEO, this is the database that we've got to be able to share with them. So please do make sure that you update this as you need to throughout the year. The responsibility is very much at your end. So none of these contact details or offices that we're looking for contact details have changed since last year. So hopefully you should be familiar with that, and it's straightforward. Going through to the next page, this is where we've made a significant change in 2018-19 compared to previous years. We previously had a whole range of questions that we asked you to provide us, which we've now narrowed down to just 2 questions in the ad plan level for this year. The first question, or the first field, we ask you to give us a brief introduction of your organisation and your strategic priorities. So here, this information, a good way to maybe think about it is if you were writing a couple of quick paragraphs that were going to be going up to the Minister for Foreign Affairs about who you are and what you do, this is that type of information that we would hope to see there. So we're not really looking for sort of marketing materials or, you know, the type of information you might pop up on your website, for example. Here we really are looking for short, sharp and focused information that we could easily use in a brief to the Minister, or that we can also use to share with our colleagues internally within DFAT, so that if they're not familiar with your organisation, in 400 words or less, they can quickly read about who you are and what you do and what your key priorities are. There is an option at the bottom for you to upload an additional file. So for example, if you've got an overall organisational strategy or a charter or a vision and a mission statement that clearly illustrates your organisation and articulates what your strategic priorities are, you might like to upload that to help clarify your organisational overview information. The next section of the ad plan here is a space for you to tell us about new initiatives and activities in 2018-19 that you would like to tell us about, that you think that are relevant to your ad plan and are going to help us understand what it is that you're doing in 2018-19 as we read through your ad plan. So here you might want to tell us about new M&E approaches or activities that you're doing in the year, any sort of new approach you're taking to capacity building, or if you've got new safeguards that are going in place or new ways of addressing cross-cutting issues, you might want to tell us about that here. This question is an optional question, so you might have absolutely nothing new that you're doing that you would like to tell us about, but we expect since you were last accredited, you've probably been tweaking a few things or updating and revising and modifying a few ways that your organisation works, and this is an opportunity for you to tell us about it so that we can stay up to date on your organisation and the way that you work. One thing that we probably would love to see in 2018-19 in this section of the report is some information on what your organisation is doing to prevent sexual exploitation and abuse in your programming, and both within your own organisation and with your local implementing partners. So a hot tip for this year is to definitely put some information in about what you are doing to address sexual exploitation and abuse. Again, you have the option to browse your files and upload a file that might illustrate the things that you've been talking about. So for example, if you have launched a new monitoring and evaluation framework in your organisation, you might like to upload an executive summary or a diagram that explains the way that that works quickly to support the points that you've outlined in that text box. Here, dot points is fantastic in this new initiatives and activities section of the report. Please feel free to use bullet points to quickly summarise those activities. From here on in, the rest of the ad plan header is very much tallying up data and facts and figures that you have inserted in your project level forms. Here, the next couple of pages tally up all of those individual numbers that you've put into your project level forms and show you those totals here in the header form. So you won't be able to type directly into any of these fields. This is purely what's been taken out of your project form. As we have a look at the beneficiaries page, the first thing that you're going to notice that's different from last year is that we have added, as well as sex disaggregation for male and female beneficiaries, we've also now included an option for NGOs to record sex indeterminate, intersex and unspecified gender beneficiaries that may be participating in any of your projects. So we've done that this year following on from a request from a number of NGOs at last year's annual Reflections workshop, saying that they were collecting, a number of NGOs are collecting this type of data, this kind of beneficiary data in the field, and that they would love that opportunity to be able to share that data with DFAT. So we've provided that with all the usual disaggregation fields for both adults and children, and also those with and without a disability. In the ANCP bulletin that we will send out later this week, I've included a link to a Australian government guidelines on sex and gender data collection that the Commonwealth Attorney General's Department has developed to look at all sorts of parts of Australian government operations that collect data on sex and gender. And that document might hopefully help you with some definitions and some data collection methods that you might find applicable. So have a little look at that and see if it's useful. We know for many of your organisations that you're not collecting this data at this stage, and I guess we realise that's fine. Because of the way Smarty Grants works, you will need to enter a 0 in any project level form on that X-gender section. You will need to enter a 0 so that the form can correctly tally and provide these total numbers at the header level. For those organisations that aren't collecting it already, we're not mandating to say that you must start collecting this type of data, but maybe this is an opportunity for you to start a discussion with some of your local implementing partners about collecting that type of data, or about those non-binary genders that you might want to be considering as part of mainstreaming gender in your programming anyway. As we go down the page, the standard urban and rural and also Indigenous peoples, ethnic minorities data disaggregation is also there. And again, that's all just tallied up directly out of the project level forms. Going through to the next page on the header, this looks at ANCP funding. And again, this is one of those pages where, for the most part, it's tallied up from the project level, but there's a few things here that we're going to ask you to enter yourselves. So the first fields, we ask you to enter in any rollover that you expect that you are going to be having. So these are funds that you have not expended on project activities by the 30th of June 2018. So they are funds that have not been spent, and you need to roll over those funds into the new financial year. Just a reminder and a clarification that if you have transferred those funds to your local implementing partner, you've actually remitted those funds to your local implementing partner, but they have not yet been spent on project activities, then they would be considered to be unspent funds. So remitting the funds does not constitute spending funds. You will be asked separately to spell out any interest that you've earned on those rolled over funds. And then in the ANCP grant field, that's where you put your ANCP grant for 2018-19. And a reminder to please include the exact grant amount right down to the dollars and cents. So you can't round up your grant amount even by 1 cent or 2 cents. For those with an uneven number, it's got to be exactly that amount that we will tell you and pop into your ANCP grant agreement. Finally, you're asked to estimate during the course of the financial year what sort of interest you think you might earn on your ANCP grant amount for 2018-19. A reminder with rollover that if you think that your rollover will exceed 10% of your 2017-18 grant amount, that you should get in touch with the ANCP team as soon as possible, and definitely prior to submitting your ad plan. So even if you think it's just a possibility, we know many of you won't be getting your full financial acquittals until into the new financial year back from your local implementing partners. But even if you think it's a possibility that your rollover is going to exceed 10%, please do get in touch with the ANCP team via the ANCP mailbox sooner rather than later, and we can talk to you about that process for seeking approval for a grant rollover of greater than 10%. The next part of the form tallies up the amount that you've allocated against each project straight out of your project level ad plan forms, and then you must manually enter your planned amount of administration that you think that you will spend in the 2018-19 year. A reminder that that can't be any more than 10% of your total grant amount. And in fact, the system will do a quick validation check over here. And if your grant amount, if you're saying you're looking to spend any more than 10%, it won't let you submit the form because of that error. The other parts are all tallied out of the project form. So the next part of the header level form, this hasn't changed from previous years. This is just a space for your organisation to tell us about any meta evaluations that your organisation is planning on undertaking in the ad plan period, and those meta evaluations that are relevant to the ANCP, your ANCP portfolio. I've just got a question that I'm going to jump to, and it relates to the administration costs. So the question is just that, is the 10% for Australian administration costs only? And typically, more or less, the answer is yes there. You'll see in the ANCP manual, in the sections up the back, there's a whole section on administration costs and what are eligible costs that you can assign to that 10% administration component. So project administration costs can be charged to the project, and you'll see that that is stepped out in the ANCP manual for you. So do check there before you submit your ad plan. Jumping back to meta evaluations, a reminder that when you're in this header level form, we're quite specifically only looking for information about meta evaluations or thematic reviews that your organisation might be doing. Any project level evaluations that you're doing can be recorded in the project level form. So here, this is pretty straightforward, and it just gives you an opportunity to tell us about those evaluations that you're doing. If you have more than one meta evaluation that you're doing, you can always use these plus and minus buttons that you'll find here on the screen, and that's how you can add or delete rows to add or take away meta evaluations that you're planning on doing this year. The final page in the ad plan header is the certification page. So here you'll find halfway down the page, it says, please attach a signed copy of the declaration. There's a little hyperlink available here of the certification template form. And when you click on that hyperlink, it'll open up a Word document for you. Once you've printed out that Word document and you've identified the relevant authorising officer within your organisation, you'll need to get them to tick each of the relevant boxes on that form and sign that form, and then you'll have to scan that form and use this browser to find that scan file and upload it here. So this is one of the things that the ANCP team will check right at the beginning in our initial check to make sure that you have uploaded this file and that an appropriate person has authorised it and signed it. The reason we ask your organisations to add this program certification into the header level is to give us that evidence that there is executive level oversight of the project proposal that you've made, that you've provided to DFAT. So a reminder that in the ANCP grant agreement, your ad plan constitutes the project proposal, or it constitutes what you've committed to deliver with your ANCP funds for the year. So here we're asking for this certification that they understand what it is that you've committed under the grant agreement to deliver with your ANCP funds for the year. So that is the header level form. That's all of the fields. You'll see as you go through to the review and submit page that where you haven't, where you've skipped an answer or where something's not tallying correctly, you'll see this red line underneath the item where it says response required, or it'll tell you the bits that you need to fix. So if in doing this review before you hit submit, it'll show you if there's any spots that you've missed that you need to fill out. If you've got any of those red lines showing you what you have not yet completed, the system won't let you submit that form if you've got some responses missing. So that is our header level form. I'm now going to click close, and we're going to go back through, hopefully, to that navigation page, and we'll jump in. I'm not going to go through the program level form this year. It's incredibly straightforward. It's exactly the same as last year and the year before. There's just that sort of one question in there. So instead today we're going to focus on the project level form, where there haven't been too many changes compared to previous years, but I'm going to highlight a couple of things. So in this instance, I'm going to use the example here of the ad plan project form here for my pretend project that is on strengthening rural Vietnamese child protection systems. So a reminder that these project level forms should be standalone executive summary of your project. It's DFAT's expectation that you've got detailed design documents that sit behind this ad plan, and that here we're really asking for you to give us an executive level summary of the project for DFAT's purposes. So here's the first page of the project level form, and here's a chance for you to tell us all about your project. First is the project name, and in 40 words or less, 40 words or less for you to be able to tell us about the project. For projects that are continuing, this should have been migrated over from last financial year, and you can update them accordingly. The next part asks you to indicate the project start date and the project end date. A reminder here, in particular with the project start date, here we are specifically asking you for the date when the project will first receive or will first be allocated ANCP funds. So your project may have been in existence before you assigned ANCP funds towards it, and there's a space for you to tell us about that in the coming boxes. But here, the project start date is the date the project first received ANCP funds. The next field, we ask you to indicate the project end date. And again, this is somewhere we're asking you to actually tell us about the full life of the project. Just because you put in a project end date that's 3 or 4 years in the future does not mean that you are committing that you will definitely put ANCP funds towards that project every year. But here we want you to tell us about the planned end date of the project, irrespective of funding source. The next question is just a simple yes/no drop-down box where you can tell us, is this the first year of project implementation? If you say yes, the question underneath is turned off. If you say no, it opens up a little box and it gives you the opportunity to tell us about any project implementation that's happened to date, just so we understand the story of your project and where it's up to. The next question, we ask you, did this project receive ANCP funds in the last ad plan period? And again, it's just a yes or no question. If you say yes, the next question that's going to open up for you is, are there any significant changes to your project compared to last financial year? If you say no to this question, the following fields of the question just disappear. If you say yes, we've got a few questions that then open up for you, and this is a little bit different to last year's ad plan form. So you'll note that up the top we've got a few little tick boxes for you to indicate to us the type of changes that you've made to the project. So you can just tick on and off the ones that are relevant to your project just by clicking on the box. With this question, the reason we've put this in is really actually just for DFAT's benefit. It's going to help us run some filters when we run reports on new projects in the year. So even if you've got a change to your project that is different to any of the fields with the tick boxes here, we would still love for you to then, in the box below, describe it to us. So even if you haven't clicked on any of these boxes because they're not relevant to your project, we would still like in the narrative below, if you feel you've got a change that we need to know about, for you to tell us there. So just, it's not that those fields that we've included are the only ones we want to hear about. The next section of the report is asking you to have a look at the most appropriate DAC codes for your project. We've included on the form the hyperlink to the OECD DAC guidelines, to the list of codes. So DAC does change the codes every year. So please, for your continuing projects, you might want to have a little look and see that you are still using the most relevant DAC code for your project and update it if they have introduced a new code that might be more relevant to your project. A reminder here that if your project has any sort of family planning component, no matter how small, that you do use the 13030 DAC code. Even if it's a very small component of family planning activity, it has to be the primary or the secondary code, and that's because of the way that DFAT has to report into multilateral organisations and things. So we ask you to bear with us on that. If you do use a DAC code that indicates you've got some component of family planning activity in your project, please remember in your project outputs or outcomes section that you clearly that you put in a line there to explain what type of family activity we're talking about, because obviously family planning can encompass a broad spectrum of activities. Next, we just ask you to select from the usual drop-down list the sector that your project best fits into. Next, as in previous years, we ask you to indicate, is this project being implemented in multiple countries? If you say no, it'll hide the multiple country question box with the breakdowns on dollars and beneficiaries, and it'll just give you the single country project box at the top here. If you say yes, that will open up the multi-country project table that you'll be familiar with, that's been in the ad plan project form for the past 2 years. One key difference this year is we've added a new column down the end called, is there physical project delivery in this country? So we know some of you have projects where you're taking beneficiaries from multiple countries, and then those beneficiaries might be coming and, for example, receiving training, and that training might be held in the Philippines, but actually the participants are coming from all over Asia. In which case, under the Philippines, you'd say, yes, there is physical project delivery in the Philippines, but in those other countries, there is no physical presence. We're not running activities in that country, but we do have beneficiaries and participants from those countries coming along, so that'd be no. Also, for those of you that are looking at online sort of e-learning, e-learning, for example, we've got one e-learning project in the system. Hopefully this just helps you articulate that. Coming along down the bottom, whether you've got a single country or a multi-country project, you are asked to list all of the implementing partners for the project. Here we do ask you that if you've got a multi-country project, if it is not obvious from the name of your organisation which country they are a partner in, we ask you to just pop in brackets afterwards where that organisation is based. And that just helps our various colleagues within the department understand who the local implementing partners in the ground they might want to engage with are. Next, as we scroll down, there's the project locations. And this is a similar mapping system to last year's, but Smarty Grants has updated it a little. So you have a couple of options here. The first is you can type in the project location as an address, as a street address. Because of the mapping provider here, it does sort of require an Australian format to addresses to be typed in here. So you'll see, for example, here, if you were to leave the suburb and the postcode field blank, because many countries don't have a suburb or a postcode field, it's not going to work for me now. But if you were to right, so yeah, so as if sorry, and I'm just going to for a second come down and hit save, and you'll then hopefully see what I'm talking about. So if you don't have a suburb or a postcode listed in your map, it will throw up an error for you saying that a postcode is required. So unfortunately, just because of the mapping system that Smarty Grants use, this is something where you might get the error. If this is a case for you, in the suburb and town field, just put in a hashtag or a full stop, something like that, and then that should hopefully allow you to save that without disrupting the rest of your address information. So you'll see with my insertion of a full stop and a hashtag that the system's now totally happy. So that's something that we've asked Smarty Grants to have a look at, and they are looking to address. But at the moment, that's the workaround. You can use the plus and minus buttons, or of course the add more button, to add as many project locations as you need to for each project. We've just got a question here. No question. So Ina's just popped in a response to say, if you're not using Internet Explorer to listen to the webinar, that can be the best format to listen to this webinar in compared to any other browser. So if you're having any difficulties hearing the webinar today, maybe try leaving the webinar and logging back in via Internet Explorer. The next section of the ad plan is the place for you to give us a bit more detail on the project description. So the first field, we're asking you to describe to us in 600 words or less what the issue is that your project is trying to address and how you're going to go about addressing that. And also just give us a little snapshot so that quickly we can understand how long your project's been going for and sort of where it's up to in its project life. The next section here, we ask you to unpack for us the project outcomes and outputs. So last year was the first year that we split this into two boxes for you, or two separate questions, and asked for you to differentiate between outcomes and outputs, and the same applies this year. So the first area with project outcomes, we're specifically looking for you to describe to us the change or the impact that you hope that your project will achieve over the entire life of the project. When you come down to project outputs, this is where we're going to ask you to break down for us year by year what activities your project is going to do on the ground that collectively will lead to you achieving project outcomes. So last year we just had the one text box for you to be able to describe to us all of your project outputs. And sometimes for us it was a little bit confusing what it is your organisation was going to be doing on the ground in any given financial year. So this year we've just given you the option from the drop-down box to choose the financial year. If your project is a continuing project, you might like to go back just 1 or 2 financial years and give us a very short, bullet point summary of what were the key activities in your project that helped you get to the point where you're up to now. Once you get to 2018-19, we expect that you should have a good amount of detail about what it is that you're actually planning to do on the ground in this coming financial year. We know for your multi-year projects that are going to continue on right up into the future that you might have a little bit less information about precisely what's going to be happening in 2019-20 or in 2020-21, But ideally, we'd like to see that you've got a little bit of a roadmap as to where your project is going to go in those future years. And then each year that you submit your ad plan for that, you can beef out the detail that you provide us as the years go on. So we know you might not have full detail, but we hope that you do have a rough outline for what it is that you're going to achieve in the coming years of the life of this, or what it is that you're going to deliver, I should say, over the coming years of the life of this project. You can always use these plus or minus rows. When you use these plus buttons, it inserts a row above where you are in the form. So for example, if I click here next to this red one, next to this empty line on the plus field, it's going to, if it cooperates, it's going to add a new row above, versus if you use the add more box down the bottom, it's going to add a row on the bottom of the table for you there. So that's going to help you chronologically get the right information in at the right time. The next section is the project funding section. So here is the spot for you to tell us how much out of your 2018-19 ANCP grant you're going to be allocating towards this project. Plus, I'm just going to pause there and come back to a question because it relates to the project information and the outputs. And the question here is, how far ahead should the ad plan have outputs listed for? So I think here this really depends on the life of the project that you are putting in the ad plan for. If this is a 3-year project that you're putting in an ad plan for, I think we'd expect to see that you have a fairly good idea for each of those 3 years, what it is that you're going to be doing in the 3 years of the project. If you are planning a much longer term project, for example, 10 years, I think you'd probably want to put in the coming, 2018-19 plus a couple of years after that to show us that you've got a bit of a roadmap and a plan for going forward. But I don't think we'd expect that you would break it down for a full 10 years into the future. But we would want to see the coming few years definitely to see that you've got a little bit of a roadmap as to where it is this project will go. Of course, we always understand that with ANCP projects, there is a requirement that you're evaluating those projects once every 3 years, that you're undertaking some sort of evaluation. And of course, that might be the point where, you then design the next phase of the project or the next sort of set of outputs in the coming years in line with any evaluation that you undertake. So I hope that answers that question. So jumping back to the section where we're talking about project funding, here this is the place for you to tell us about the amount of ANCP grant you're allocating, any rollover from 2017-18 that you're popping in to the new financial year, and any interest that you think you might earn during the course of the financial year that you're going to allocate to this project. The system will automatically tally that up for you, and then that'll give us the total amount of ANCP funding allocated to that project in this year. The next question asks you about the amount of funds that will be spent on design, monitoring and evaluation. Here this is going to be a component of your total funding that you've listed up above. So that's not funds in addition to, in this example, the 70,000 listed above. This 5,000 that are listed here in the example is part of the 70,000 listed up here at the total. Then next we ask you in this project to tell us about the amount of your organisation's cash funds raised from the Australian community that you're going to be allocating towards this project. There of course is a requirement that every NGO contributes a minimum 20% in matched funds across their entire ANCP portfolio. One thing that we would recommend to all NGOs is to have a little think about your cash contribution, your co-contribution to these projects. It's a key difference in the ANCP that we have that 20% matched funding requirement. It's something that differentiates us from many other funding windows available that DFAT offers. And one of the reasons why the ANCP is very flexible and allows you to use your funds in ways that align to your organisation's strategies is this 20% co-contribution. So have a little think about maybe putting just a small, even if it's only a small amount, that you do actually put some co-contribution, some matched funds towards each project in your ANCP portfolio, if that's possible, if that's an option for you. We know it's not necessarily always going to be an option, but it does demonstrate to our colleagues internally within DFAT that you have a stake in each of these projects and that you are also contributing your own funding to these projects, and that's what helps with that flexibility in our program. So enter that dollar amount here. The next question asks you to indicate to us any other funding from other sources that you have for this ANCP project. So here you might be receiving funds from another DFAT program, or you might be wanting here to indicate that you've got funds from another overseas donor or a private sector organisation that you're contributing to this project. One question that we do receive from many NGOs throughout the year is that if you're receiving funds from an Australian private sector organisation, is that considered to be funding from another source, or could that be considered to be part of your NGO contribution? And the answer here is that in fact it could be considered as both. So in the RDE explanatory notes, it does define funds raised from the Australian community as including those funds that are raised from private sector or Australian philanthropic organisations. So for example, if you were receiving a donation from a private sector organisation like the ANZ Bank, if they were going to be giving you $20,000 and they had said to you, we're giving you $20,000, but we would specifically like for you to use that $20,000 towards your Vietnamese child protection system strengthening project, and we would like you to put our branding on that project, and we would like you to give us some updates about how that project is going, then you would be listing here in this project's ad plan that you're receiving funds from that private sector donor. But because the ANZ is considered to be part of the Australian funds raised from the Australian community as defined in the RDE explanatory notes, in addition to listing that ANZ donation here in the other donors area in the ad plan, you could also list that $20,000 up here as part of your NGO's contribution to the project. If it were the case that the ANZ had given you $20,000 and said you can put this towards whatever you like with no strings attached, and it was in no way tethered to this project, the only place you would need to list that is up here on the NGO contribution, if that's how you were using those funds. There would then no longer be the need for you to indicate that you have specific donor funding for this project down here in the end. So in this instance, I'm just going to delete that row from the ANZ because their $20,000 is not specifically tethered to this project. I hope that makes sense. If you've got any questions about that, please do continue to pass them through to the ANCP mailbox throughout the year. Many of you have asked about that previously. The next section is the project risk section. Here, as we have in all previous years, we've asked you to identify each of the risks that relate to the project, and then for each risk that you identify, to give us, probably just in some bullet points or dot points, the different treatments that you will have in place to address those risks. For each individual risk that you identify, we would ask that you would add a new row, and then so we would have one risk with one or more treatments identified next to that. I would remind you that this project risk information that you include here for us should just be a summary of the risks that you've identified in your own standalone risk register for the project. You don't need to duplicate for us your entire risk register here. It's just a snapshot for us. It is our expectation that you would have a standalone risk register for each project that is specific to each project that sits behind the work and the information that you're providing to us. A reminder here too that when you're providing us this project risk information, or in fact when you're completing your risk registers in the organisation, it should be specific and tailored to that project. So we shouldn't see exactly the same risk information in every project level ad plan that we open up. Everything should be tailored and specific to the context that you're working in. The next question underneath says, asks you to indicate, is this project being implemented in a high risk or sensitive location? So in the narrative up above, we've described for you what we consider to be a high risk location. And that for us really does include do not travel locations as defined on Smart Traveller. Please remember that those travel advisories and the way that different countries or regions within different countries is categorised changes on a regular basis. So if you've got a project that's continuing from last financial year, you're best to check the Smart Traveller website and make sure that the travel advice for that country hasn't changed in the past 12 months. There's a link to the Smart Traveller website here in the form itself. If you are implementing in a high risk or a sensitive location, then we ask you to say choose yes from the drop-down menu here, and then outline for us the how you will monitor the project, how your Australian organisation will monitor this project in the field. Here we'd ask you to please specify whether or not any Australian staff or contractors or consultants that you engage will travel to those high-risk locations, and we ask you to outline any risk treatments that you will have in place around monitoring or around staff travel to those locations. You could either outline those treatments here in this narrative box asking you how you're going to monitor those projects, or you might like to just outline it in the risk and treatment section up above. As long as the information makes it into the form, then in either place is okay for us. One thing that would ask you to have a think about is if you are delivering those projects in very unstable environments, is that do you have a plan for if you can no longer physically send your Australian staff into that location, or your local implementing partners can't get into a location? What are your backup plans if the situation deteriorates there that you might have in place should you not be able to go with your first preferred sort of monitoring and evaluating technique? Heading through to the next page, here's where we ask you to give us some beneficiary information. Most of this is quite straightforward and exactly the same as last year. First, we ask you to tell us about your data collection and disaggregation approach and any sort of definitions that you might be using and how you and your partners are going to go about collecting data for this project. Next, we ask for you to give us that breakdown of expected beneficiaries during the course of the 2018-19 ad plan period, and that's disaggregated by sex or gender, and then urban and rural, and Indigenous people, ethnic minorities. So they're the same fields that we had a look at there in the header, and this is where the header form will tally up those beneficiary numbers from. The next page of the ad plan form asks you to tell us about any project level evaluations that you're planning to undertake during this ad plan period. So the first question here is going to just ask you whether or not you're planning any evaluations. If you say no, the remainder of the questions about the detailed evaluation will sort of just be hidden in the form. We're also going to ask you to indicate if the project has been evaluated within the last 3 years. A reminder that ANCP projects, there is an expectation that's documented in that ANCP Monitoring, Evaluation and Learning Framework that you'll be evaluating projects every 3 years. The form goes on just to give you space to tell us about the evaluation that you're planning, or any evaluation you're planning to undertake this year, and with the option to upload any files. So for example, if you've already developed a terms of reference or something for that evaluation that you're going to be doing, you might like to update that here. The next part of the form asks you to tell us about how your project aligns both with Australian government aid programs and policies, and also the host government's aid programs and policies. And again, here you might be describing to us how your project either directly aligns or extends or complements work that the host government is already doing. And similar question then for with the Australian aid program about how your project both might complement and extend work that's being delivered through other parts of the Australian aid program. You'll find a link here on the page to overarching Australian aid policy, and also links to country by country or region by region aid investment plans. So you'll find the relevant hyperlinks to the DFAT website there. The next part of the form asks you to tell us about how your project is addressing gender equality, one of our first 2 cross-cutting themes. There is a lot of narrative text here to help you select the most appropriate OECD DAC gender marker for your project. We have updated this text a little bit since last year following advice from our gender team and DAC. So please do take the time to read this detailed information and choose the gender marker that best describes your project. A reminder here, I guess, is that in order for you to be selecting principal as the gender marker for this project, really here this is most appropriately for those projects where gender equality is the absolute main objective of your project. So we know, of course, that you're required to address gender in all of your projects because it's mainstreamed, but here principal is really for those projects where gender is the principal objective of that project, the absolute main objective. If gender equality is an important and deliberative objective for you, but just one of a number of objectives. So for example, if you're doing a childhood nutrition project where actually the main objective of that project is to increase, to improve the nutrition of children, you might have a strong gender focus in that project and helping women with their livelihoods that support their families. But actually the primary reason for you doing that project is about improving childhood nutrition rates. So that's where you'd be choosing significant versus principal. Again, don't be deterred from choosing not targeted. We know for your projects, we know that NGOs do great work in including women and considering gender equality in their programming. But if your project doesn't have sort of deliberate gender equality objectives, either principally or as one part of it, then please feel free to select not targeted in this section of the report here. There's then a space down the bottom for you to tell us about any gender analysis that you've undertaken, just an opportunity to describe that to DFAT if you've undertaken that. The next page in the form talks about disability inclusion, and I think many of the principles and there's a lot of detailed description for gender, but only brief description here for disability. But I think a lot of the principles and the way that you would select the marker for gender, those sort of processes could be applied to disability as well. So please, again, do take the time to read the text here, but maybe think about how you've responded to gender equality and think about disability inclusion in the same way. Again, we give you the opportunity to tell us about any disability analysis that you've undertaken in the design of this project. Just a couple of pages left to go on the project level form, and some key bits that both the ANCP team and also our colleagues at post and informatic areas are looking for. The first is sustainability. Here we're going to ask you to tell us about what are you doing at each stage of the project's life in order to ensure that those target outcomes that your project's looking to achieve can be sustained following the completion of the project. So here, sustainability shouldn't just be something that in the final year of the project you're looking to shore up. It's not just about exit strategy. It's about what are you doing right from the design phase to make sure that the right stakeholders are involved, that the right things have been considered in the design, and that the right project activities and relationships are going to be formed throughout the life of the project to ensure sustainability after the project has completed. There's some additional guidance text here too about talking about significant assets or administrative arrangements, how they'll be supported or how you will ensure their ongoing currency following completion of the project. Next, there's the usual questions about private sector development and how your project is addressing private sector development, and a place for you to talk to us about how your project is addressing or including the private sector. Next, there's a section in the ad plan for you to tell us about how your project is actively involving Indigenous peoples or ethnic minorities in the places that you're working. The final box down the bottom question relates to family planning. Remember that if you do select yes and say that yes, this project is related to family planning, that you should be using the DAC code of 13030 up in the first part of the form, and that somewhere within the project outputs or outcomes, you should have clearly articulated to how your project, what you're specifically doing, what those family planning activities you're specifically doing, what they are, so that we have an understanding of where they fall on the whole scale of family planning. The final question in the form is just that other information field. So here, if you've run out of words in one of the other boxes and you wanted to tell us something, you can include that here in the other information. If there's any information that doesn't belong naturally anywhere else in the form, you can use this. Or similarly, throughout the course of the year, if you're making amendments to your ad plan or if you're addressing some feedback you've received from post and things, you can make a note in this other information field about how you've updated the project. There's also an option down here to choose a file to browse and upload a file that might illustrate what you're doing in your project a little bit more if you haven't been able to describe within the word limit elsewhere. I'm just going to come back to a question. We've got a question here, just it's the same question that we had before about the 10% administration costs. So this just relating, same question that we had before about the 10% administration costs. So this just relating back to the header and about how each NGO can use up to 10% of your ANCP grant amount each year for administration costs. The question here again is just, is the 10% administration costs for Australian admin only? There is detailed information about this in the ANCP manual. Can't recall off the top of my head the number, the section number in the manual that it is, but in the ANCP manual, it clearly says the admin costs that under that 10%, costs that are eligible or not eligible. So for the most part, those costs are costs that you're going to be incurring here in Australia. It's for things like staff salaries, rent, electricity bills, costs like membership fees and things that your organisation might have. There is a line in the ANCP manual that says project administration costs can be charged to projects in your ad plan. That ANCP manual does not then go any further to define what that is. So that is up to you and your auditors and your finance team to determine. We think that provides you a lot of flexibility, and we don't propose ever defining that in the ANCP manual for you, because it will put restrictions on what you're able to do with your ANCP funds. So I think it's a good situation at the moment that we have using the definitions that are in the current manual. So please do refer to that. And if you have any other questions, please don't hesitate to get in contact with the ANCP team about how to use those admin costs. There's one final page in the project level form, and that is indicators. So this is just the spot where you can indicate now at ad plan time which indicators you plan to collect data for and report to us in your performance report next year in September. You'll see up the top of the page that there are technical notes for some of the different indicators, and they're the ones that are indicated with a blue hyperlink, and that will take you through to a Word document that specifies the type of data and how to collect that data. You should be able to find at least one indicator for every project that you are implementing. So we know that not all of these indicators are going to suit all of the many different types of projects that your 57 organisations are implementing. But one of the things that we will do an initial check on is we will look for those projects that have not selected any indicators at all. So if absolutely nothing else, there is an indicator that indicates how many civil society organisations, how many local in-country implementing partners will be participating in this ANCP funding project. So if absolutely nothing else, we hope that you should be able to use the indicator that identifies to us that you're involved with local implementing partners. But between all of those other indicators, there should be usually something within each sector that you can find that hopefully meets, or is relevant to the work that you're doing, and you can check in those technical notes to see which one best suits you. A lot of those technical notes have been updated this financial year. So if it's been a while since you've had a look at the technical notes, I would definitely have a little read of those technical notes to make sure you're still using the most relevant indicator for your project. The final page just reminds you what to do in submitting your ad plan. Our recommendation would be that you populate your header and your program and your project level forms, but then that you would go through and save and review and submit all of your project level forms in the first instance, and then do a check in the header level to make sure that all of the figures are tallying up correctly. Glenn is in the room, Smarty Grant Support, shaking his head at me because I am telling you lies. So here I might actually just let Glenn explain to you his recommended best way to go through.
Hi everybody. Monty did a wonderful job up until that last moment. What you need to do is, after you've entered all your project information and all your header, return to the header, and once you open the header, it will automatically calculate all those project values back into the header. And if there's any real error, especially in the funding, check it. If there's an error there, like say, for example, your project money was too much or whatever, make sure your funding is correct. If it's not correct, you can go back and adjust the projects where you put in the wrong value, maybe put in an extra 0 or whatever. Once you have that correct and the header is correct, then yes, you can submit all those projects, programs, and then your header. But always return back to the header because everything sums up to your header. So you want to ensure that the final product is correct and you've got that authorized signature attached to the header. and then submit it all in one big package. All right, back to Marty.
Thank you, Glenn. And of course, the reason that's important, that clarification that Glenn made, is once you hit submit on any of your forms, if you need those forms reopened to change something, you'll need to contact the ANCP team and have them reopen that form for you. So that's why, of course, it's important to make sure that there's no errors in the header form with the tallying before you hit all of the project and program level forms. So that brings us pretty much to the end of the presentation. A reminder now as I jump back to that final slide that if you have any questions at all between now and really the 29th of June, Friday the 29th of June, please don't hesitate to get in contact with the ANCP team via ancp@dfat.gov.au or on 02 61785 888. Alternatively, if you have a very technical Smarty Grants question, you can always contact the DFAT Smarty Grants teams, that's Glenn and Jessica, via smartygrants@dfat.gov.au. The Smarty Grants team are best going to be able to help you with those technical questions or where you're having an issue or a problem with the actual Smarty Grants system. But if you've got a question about what type of information should I put in this form or what sort of answer are you really looking for here, then get in touch with the ANCP team. But look, if you don't know who to ask, just come to the ANCP team and we'll make sure we direct your question in the right way. I've got one last question that says, for the evaluations section, do we need to select that even if the project has been going for less than 3 years? So here with evaluations, the requirement is that you would be evaluating the project once, at least once every 3 years. So if this is the first or the second year of your project, the first question is going to say, will you be evaluating this year? And your answer might be no. And then the next question says, have you evaluated this within the last 3 years? And you would say no to that. For us, when we look at the project start and finish dates, it's going to be obvious to us that your project hasn't been going for 3 years yet. And so we wouldn't have that expectation that you would be evaluating it. If we see from your project start and finish dates that your project has been going for 6 years now, but you have not evaluated it within the last 3 years and you have no intention to evaluate it in the upcoming year, we're probably going to give you some feedback asking you about what your evaluation plans and asking you to clarify that for us. So I hope that makes sense. And the next question I have is more of a sort of an admin one. It says, same to previous years, can we submit ad plans early? So yes, you absolutely can. Your ad plan forms are all sitting there ready for you to go now. The round is absolutely open. It's been open for sort of 6 or 8 weeks now. So you can submit your ad plans anytime now between today and 5 p.m. on the 30th of June. One of the things that that we won't be able to do is probably provide you any feedback before sort of that late July period, because when we go out to our colleagues at Post, we're only going to do that once with all of the ANCP projects. So even if you were to submit all of your projects and things now, unless you've got absolutely no change to last year's ad plan, we probably can't approve your ad plan ahead of the end of July. But if you've got no change to ad plans, by all means, please do submit early and we will get it out of the way for you. I've just got a question now to quickly remind an update of the maximum increase and decrease to any one NGO's grant amount this year. So I'm just popping this slide up again for you here, which that reminder that in 2018-19 it would be a maximum 15% decrease and a maximum 20% increase compared to your 2017-18 grant amount. Just there to clarify. Shortly after we did the ANCP face-to-face information sessions in March, I did send out to all ANCP contacts number 1 and 2 the PowerPoint slides, including this slide that you see now. So if you need a reminder, those slides were sent out in late March for you there. So if we don't have any more questions, that does bring us to the end of today's presentation. If you do have any questions at all between now and June, please don't hesitate to get in contact with us. We're always happy to have a chat and help you through the ad plan process. Thank you so much again to ACFID for hosting us today. Thank you all very much for joining us today. And we look forward to reading all of your ad plans in July. Thank you. Thanks, guys.